just to see whether it
Is
does.
being recorded.
That's great. Good morning. That's great.
Have I told everyone that I have fiber?
Yeah.
It's amazing. It's it makes the internet something else when it's this fast. It's bizarre. So hang on.
Yeah, I'm reminded I need to prune my tree out front because my interwebs come over copper wire. Perfectly fast, because luckily I'm in the middle of town. But
You still live in the copper age.
a storm will take them out. Well, early adopter. Each time there's something that people come around and say, "When was this put in?" I said, "Well, probably longer ago than you thought."
So we have a couple of things to get through today. Fabien will be doing demo, which is going to be amazing. I had a sneak at some of it. I just want to highlight a few basics. Oh, here's Mr. Horn. Excellent. Are you there, Bob? You don't have to turn camera on if you don't want to, of course, but you're there, right? You're connected? Cool.
Yes, I am. Yes.
Awesome. Right.
If I get strange. I think it's normal. Okay.
Glad to see you all.
Excellent. Right. So Dene and I had a very worthwhile little pre-talk before this, and it came clear that a few things need to be clarified. And the key thing of that is, Fabien, who's your, oh my God, it's that guy. We've seen that guy before.
Hang on, you're with Fabien. How cool is that?
We were wondering if it would take half an hour or more to notice that there was an extra person there.
Yeah, I saw him. I do not recognize Leon from 360 degrees. Hang on, I'm going to close my door. Family's home early. Right, so
Yes.
one of the things Dene and I realized that it's important to make clear for everybody in the community are some of the design rules. And that is, we definitely want to try different kinds of things. But the basic working environment, what was the okay question?
The mic is better because I think it was a bit too much. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's good now. Is that what we built together last year, the basic text on the background, is still what we want to have this year as one of the main views. Now, I put an article in our journal that some of you have seen, which is one proposal for how we can go through different ones. Hi, Rob. We do have a little bit of a topic to talk about ACM and stuff, but just, sorry, Rob, I'll start again. It's really brief. What we had last year with text on a plain background is really, really important. And that is one of the key views we need to have for this year. We also need to have some sort of elegant mechanism to go into other views and separately to toggle the environment. Right, I'm going to give you, so you can just look at these images while we, please don't, waste your time reading it, but. So Dene reminded me that in this presentation for the multi-view desk, I didn't put in the most obvious one, which is what I just mentioned. Basically, you sit down plain view. So just to kick off a bit of a discussion, imagine you have a semicircular desk of sorts, virtually, that has overlaid your physical desk. And to change your view, you put your hand down and you do a swipe gesture. And then everything changes. So you have a different work environment. So you could maybe be working on a map, knowledge map type thing. You do this, and now you're in a small constrained writing space, or you have a timeline, or it's a geographic thing, or if it's a citation tree, etc. Right? All of these things that are written in the journal are just ideas for us. There's also some discussion about whether we should support table or not. There are some strong preferences there. I like the idea of physical furniture because it's in front of you anyway. Some don't. I've had several people, pros and cons. So I just wanted to make that clear. Dene, I'm sure you have something to add to that.
But one thing we talked about is thinking about the process, right? So are the layers of experience. So a user walks into a space and that's the environment, and they get to have maybe two different perspectives of the environment. Mine is minimalist, and there's more of the skeuomorphic experience. That would be vital because there are folks that are coming from academia that are new to VR, and they need to be breadcrumbed into the world, and so something familiar would be okay. We're also wanting to attract people that have experience with VR, that want to work in VR for their daily activities. They don't need this stuff. They just want to work, right? So we have two different environments that we can toggle through and hopefully move people from A to B at some point, right? Once we get into the environment, then we have these different views. And there's like map view, right, author view, various views. And what I'm imagining is that we have a carousel at the bottom, our menu, that looks like a carousel at the bottom of the screen that's always there. Maybe it moves around, but it shows up immediately at the bottom. And there's an image, like you can tell this is a map view, right? Because there's a map image. And then it says map view. And then the next one would say author. Looks like a text and it says author. That way people are trained to think about when they see this view, the map, they know that's the map view. We start to train them in the environment, right? And then that also shows up on this side and B side, right? Because it just makes sense to have it on both sides, right? But at some point, people can make a choice. They can tap on that image, the map view image, and the map view comes up. Maybe they want both map and author. They tap on that and that populates the space. Maybe they want the annotated bibliography view and they tap on that. Now they've got all three in the space. Now they want to let me finish. And when let's say they want to get rid of annotated bibliography, they can tap on the X and it goes away and goes back, right? So they're able to decide what kinds of views they have within their environments, right? So it's two levels of thinking, but A side, B side with a carousel at the bottom that's training newbies about the VR environment. Okay, thank you.
To address primarily the question of onboarding process, Fabien, I had an initial jokey idea, which is once you put the headset on, in front of you is the 1970s computer. And in the relatively plain environment, all I was meant to do is exactly what Dene is saying, give people a little bit of familiarity. It may be too ridiculous to even bother with. But what we do need to decide on very soon as a community is, how do you toggle views? How do you toggle backgrounds, kind of the environment? And as Dene just highlighted as well, how do you, Zoom acting up, how do you maybe combine things, right? Because my little notion with this whole swiping thing is that you change everything, not just the little wedge, but the entire 180 or whatever view. But in many cases, you definitely want combined views, right? So the question then is, can you save them? Like saved views and other types of software where you have your annotated bibliography here, writing here, and whatever it might be. That may be another way of doing it. So, Fabien, please.
So from an implementation standpoint, what I'm trying to do is not to say yes to anybody who wants to say, hey, I want my desk, quote unquote, higher and lower, or I don't want no desk, or I want a wall there or this, in the sense of crafting a specific experience for one person. Because even though that would be efficient for that person, there is a huge risk that the other person doesn't want that. And if I keep on going back and forth between, let's say, different unique perspective, which are legitimate, like, of course, if a person has a desk there and they're used to it, it would be efficient for them to have it. It might even be interesting for me to do it for them. But the problem is, I'm not sure it's solving like the big picture or the problem of it. So I think finding the right way in terms of being flexible enough that allow somebody who has a desk or no desk or go on a train or whatever is more interesting. I don't honestly know how to do that efficiently or with a good user experience, but that's kind of why I'm always trying to push back to say it's not that I don't care for either a desk or no background way, but why rather I add, let's say, a toggle that say you decide you want a desk or no desk, you want a URL with or without a background. It's not because I'm postponing the decision, it's because the hope there is that each user will tailor their experience to their own need, which is probably very different based on how they work, the environment they have physically set up, or if they're traveling or not. So just kind of why it probably looks like I'm always pushing back or even postponing or not sticking to one decision for one person, is because that's kind of the fear of doing a crafting or an experience for somebody, again, who is legitimate and yet who have potentially the opposite need of the person next to them.
Peter, 1 second, just on that. Fabien, we do, well, I understand that. I think we do. It is very, very important to be able to customize, but we still do need an initial environment. We still need to decide on, users put the headset on, what do they see? Peter?
One thing from real life that I might like to pull into the environment would be the idea of having a dedicated Karl. When you're in a library, you have a whole bunch of Karls. Now, since we're in virtual reality, we could have more than one, so I could have a different project at each Karl. When I res into the environment, I could see multiple study Karls in front of me, and I could jump teleport to the one that's relevant for what I want to do now. And that way it'd be like having the equivalent of multiple desktops on the Mac, where I'm always jumping between desktops. I have one devoted to programming. I have one desktop that's just email. We could have something analogous to that in the virtual world using the physical study Karl metaphor from a library.
Peter, it would be nice if you, on the site or somewhere, just write that down, because that definitely sounds like one of the views that we should definitely strongly consider looking at. We also need to consider how to toggle between them. So,
also, one other question. Do we want to support building an index as part of the authoring project? Because I could see an indexing view in addition to the other views that we were talking about before.
I have no idea. Put that one down together with the other one, please, sir.
Okay.
Mark, by the way, I'm seeing you on Friday, right? Are you going to be in Southampton on Friday?
Not that I know. Well, I possibly can be. I need to check my diary.
I just can't let
let's circle back.
and Leon be the only cool guys meeting up.
Well,
so just say yes.
Well, I'll check with you offline anyway. So it's not the whole thing's up. It was interesting, actually. Funny enough, that my thought when I was just sort of familiar. I mean, I assumed that when we talk about sort of saved views, and essentially that's just an environment setup. So when you come into your starting environment, the thing that you see when you put your headset on is essentially, so you know, the range of things you might see in that sort of set of icons, whatever, around you would possibly vary, because as Fabien said, so that's some metadata. Park to one side how and where you set that metadata up, but essentially, so I might come into the same environment or the same overall construct as you, as say Peter, but I'd actually see a slightly different set of choices because that's what I set up. I mean, I think, and that fits with the structure I think that Fabien's doing, but maybe I'm sort of misunderstanding. I do probably think there is a need to have slightly different environments. My observation of working for some decades now in sort of information spaces is that people are just different, and there's no getting around it. So I think we would be not helping ourselves by trying to assume that there's this one model that fits everyone. I think some people want to be somewhere. So when they put this thing on, they don't just see a space. Other people don't need that, and they would probably like to jump straight in, because otherwise they just see it's just something else they have to do to get to where they're going. Neither of those is wrong. It very much depends on the individual. So I think it's good to cater for both of them. One other thing that sort of came to me just listening to the descriptions earlier is this sense of, well, are these views that we're calling them, are they effectively fully immersive views? So you're actually in them. In which case, I think it's hard to share them. You could, yes, you could have a mechanism say, okay, I want to go to another one. You might also want to essentially nest one inside of another. So you might want to say to see some other view essentially as a window, for want of a better term, inside your environment, because you can't be fully immersed in two different environments at once. Or you'd just be building a third environment, essentially. There's a blend of the two. But you might want to see some information presentationally in a form of that view, essentially within the view you're working in. I don't. I mean, I don't have an idea exactly how that fits out. I'm just mentioning the idea in case it holds on. And then another thing that's come from a sort of side conversation we have been emailing back and forth with Bob is the sense of, is the view that I'm looking at effectively, I'm just looking at the view. So am I looking at information space that is broadly around me? Or am I basically one of a number of people in a common space?
Right.
Because again, they're both legitimate. I think they have different rationales. And a point to bear in mind is if lots of you in the same space is that unless you're actually looking from the same perspective, you may be seeing the wrong side of whatever you're looking at. So something to bear in mind.
Unless I'm wrong, we are doing single user only. However, your portal thing is really clever. I don't mean to sound patronizing, but I hadn't thought of that. That is really clever. Please write it in our journal, because having a 3D kind of a view through as an idea is really, really lovely. But I think we have to actively step back from multi-user experience now.
No, that's absolutely fine. It was just something that came back from about the 4 articles I've yet to flesh out from the list I'd cited, which was basically just trying to. I was reflecting on last year, and I thought a lot of truly unintentional miscommunication was really because all of us are working from an internal perspective of what the thing we're talking about means, and it's apparent that they are very, very different. So some are thinking immersively, some are thinking about being in a space rather than space being entirely around. All these sort of differences, and because they're internal, it just seems obvious to us that that's what the person you're speaking to is thinking, and we don't have a way to surface it. So one of the things we might need to do is to start just sort of fleshing out some sort of a syntax, well, not syntax, but some sort of description, nothing too formal, of these different states, just so we can recognize them. So we can see, which things that we're doing fit to which, to avoid miscommunication.
I would really like it if you write that down. The article that I wrote for the multi-view thing caused a lot of argument in the community, which is great. There were a lot of things I left out, but it at least helped us see those differences. If you could do that for what you're talking about, that would be greatly appreciated. Bob, please. Oh, you're muted still, Bob.
Thank you. Are we trying to serve all authors who might be in virtual reality? It sounds like it when I listen to the conversation up to now, rather than realize that there are classes of authors and classes of papers. And as long as we stay in my view, as long as we stay in this, we can do everything for all authors or something, or close to that, with a fuzzy edge. I mean, this is a concept that has lots of fuzzy edges all over the place. I can't see how we're going to really go somewhere.
Bob, that's such a great question, but this is something that is in the grant. So what we've written in the grant is that it's a very narrow person that we're focusing on, right? It's academics. We're supposed to be writing for academics in general, so not just a general user. And so we're imagining a future for them to author and read in this environment. So that is the scope of the grant proposal, right? So what I'm imagining is that we're going to have people that will never put a headset on. And we've seen those people at conferences, right? I'm up, put that on my head. But we are trying to imagine a future audience where it becomes more normal. I mean, I said this to all of us a long time ago, and you weren't in the room, but I remember when my colleagues at a faculty meeting in 2009 refused to be on social media, right? Now everybody's on social media. I remember in 2006 when I arrived at WSU, people hated technology, would not have a laptop. Now there's not one person in the faculty without a laptop, right? So we're imagining that there's a way for folks to come through this system and at some point want to use VR, right? Because it's common. And we're preparing for that. So how do you prepare people for an environment that they're going to be working in? And so that's why I was imagining a side A and side B. But it's academics predominantly.
So does it include the ability to include, and you won't be surprised if I ask this question, to include the creation of diagrams in the document?
Yeah, we're imagining that as part of authoring. Absolutely, which is why I invited you to come and speak weeks ago.
Yeah.
Your expertise in that. So absolutely, my perspective of text, I think, aligns with yours, right? So it's not just words, but it's also how words are arranged in a specific view that includes graphs and maps and all kinds of different environments.
So it isn't always clear to me in a discussion like this that those constraints are there for all of us, and we move on from there.
Yeah.
Now, I'm very grateful, by the way, to the project, let's put it that way, and interactions with several of you and so forth, because it has inspired me to create something in 2D for myself for now, because I work on I'm working on problems that are not necessarily related to the focus of this group, but working with this group helps me think about how do we improve thinking. And one of the things that has inspired me, and I will, if I can share my screen, I'll simply just show you one thing. Share. Here's a large room space. I just made a large room space. Just I don't know what kind of background I want, but I need a background because I'm I believe that the Gestalt psychologists have figured out that we always have backgrounds. Doesn't matter. We always create a background. Anyway, what I'm grateful for is this thing on the top that the hand is pointing to. I now have created about 20 of what I call these panels. And you'll note that the panels enable me to bring together multiple graphic things that I've been doing much of my recent life together in one space. And in virtual reality, I'm gonna want to be able to grab those, like where the hand is, and move them around, and throw out all these other objects that are on the screen and make it larger, and then click on the objects in there to go to see the detail of them. That's something that I'm reproducing on my desktop today in order to do my work, insofar as I can do that. I'll unshare, and unless somebody wants it there.
Yeah, leave it up a little bit, Bob. First of all, that is truly beautiful. I'm very grateful that you made that and that you showed it to us. Thank you. Really, really nice to see. Are you using the Quest headset these days for testing?
We're using what?
Are you using the headsets?
No.
Okay, but you still have it, right?
Yes.
Okay, so what I'd like you to try to do is to experience Fabien's current demo. We can walk you through later how to do that because it has a very nice sense of space. It's very clean. Because when it comes to dealing with XR, it's easy when we don't have a headset on to think there's just a lot of space, but there isn't. First of all, we're looking at a very constrained angle. And when things are in depth, there's issues with occlusion. And so all of these things are what we are experimenting with, which is great. So to have what you're showing here as a inspiration is very much appreciated. Now, the main theme we need to get done relatively soon is to figure out how to go between, I think it was Karl who called it kind of desktops. Because as Dene says, not everybody will want to work in the same view all the time, right? And everybody, we all have really cool ideas for what to do. A diagramming composition view or room or space or whatever we call it, I think will be very, very useful. Hang on, there's stuff being written here on the side. I can't read that right now. So that's what I mean by we have to make some initial decisions, right? So let's forget the naive user who needs to see something familiar. Maybe we do that, but that's almost theater. The basic thing, one thing that Dene and I are not entirely in sync on is whether to include the physical table in the virtual environment. And that's okay. If it doesn't have to always be there. But what is the feeling of the room of going from this chart composition room to a mapping room to a writing room? Should we do something with a carousel? Should we do something on the hand menu? Should it be a gesture? Should we do different? Yeah, anyway, if you can unshare now, Bob, and I will lower my hand. I'll pass it over to Mark and then Fabien on this.
Just quickly on that sort of last question, it occurs to me that so Bob's actually quite neatly articulated. It's a sort of problem I often find myself trying to do any sort of info viz stuff is I know where I want to get to. I think I've got the stuff. I just don't know how to get it in the damn view because that's been designed or presented in a way that at the moment is alien to me. That's not by intent of the person making it. It's just that, I need to know stuff I can't guess. And there's nowhere I can go and look that guesses me. So taking on your point that whether we need something that's an environment just out there to make people feel warm and fuzzy, I think nested within what Bob's saying is we definitely need a way to sort of help people say, right, I basically have some information. I want to do something in this view type, one of the ones that we have sort of defined. What I need to know is how I get it in there, which might include things like, well, you'll need to have it in these sort of forms, and the way that you'll pass it in will be this. And yeah, Mark, Fabien, I think it's already made up.
Mark, that's a very separate discussion, I think. How we do the data in and out. That's really, really important. I think.
No. You're missing the point. The data is incidental. What I'm trying to explain is that in order to do the thing you want to do, you need to know in essence the rules that get you there, and they're not self-evident. So that's the narrow point with that, and I'll stop there.
Just to address your point, Mark, the thing is for the initial user, at least for testing, they go in, there's stuff. It is there. How you move is that what you mean, or what do you mean?
No, I was addressing Bob's point. He's got some stuff, but it's in the wrong place. He wants to get it in the right place, and so one of the things we need to do is
you mean this kind of moving it in the space.
No. I mean, no. I have some files that aren't in the space. I want to work with them in the space. I need to understand from the perspective of the task I'm trying to do. So I don't need to understand all the metadata structure because that's not where my head's at. I just want to know how I take my diagrams, put them in a space where I can do stuff with them. Or it might be another similar task. It's a very common problem with software. because
No, absolutely. Fabien, do you want to maybe start with that before you go on to your other point? How to load Mark's data.
it's not as simple as loading, though. I think you're misunderstanding.
But Mark,
because
we need to have specific discussions on the data types, the data formats, the data connections, all of that stuff, the metadata. You and me both agree it's super important. But right now, we're just talking about you have your knowledge. There are different views of it. What is the interaction we toggle with? That's really. But otherwise, we're just going.
That's not what we were just discussing. There was quite clear case. Someone has explained they have some information they want to put it into one of our view
I have
spaces.
some information.
It's understanding.
So I can understand you, Mark. I'm not meaning to break you up. I'm sorry, but just so I really understand, they have some information where? Is it on their computer or on the headset already?
Yeah, it's going to be a digital file, but they are not thinking. So we have a really elegant structure which Fabien has produced, and he's made it very open for putting things through. Their problem is not that they need to understand the detail of how the system that Fabien's building for us works. They need a different sort of instruction. So, okay, to get your stuff from here to here, what you're going to do is you're going to take the files on your computer, you're going to pass it into here, and it's going to end up in there. And any restrictions you need to know. And that's nothing to do with the data per se. It's acknowledging the task facing the user to get to where they want to go to, just to get to the start line.
Yeah, that's a little beyond right now. Fabien, just 1 second. I see Brandel is snuck in the room, which is always nice. So Brandel, the key thing we're talking about now is how you handle kind of different rooms, kind of different environments. Is it going to be some kind of swiping and you're in a minimalist, swiping and you're in a typing room or whatever? We're basically talking about changing view spec in a fun, interesting, clear manner. Fabien.
I'll probably want to show you, as I explained, I think that might help things a bit. So I'm doing it actually. Let me know if you can see my screen, please.
Fabien, should we go into the world if we have headsets ready?
Up to you. I will, since I'll show, it's going to be tricky if you don't see, but the link is, I'll put the link in the chat. There are things that are per URL, so I recommend to...
Just really briefly to help people go in, if you go to our website, guys, and you go to authorship, there's current XR experience. There's one named number 2. If you click on this in your headset, you'll open what is showing now.
Right. So what I'm going to show is trying to specifically address the last remark and also Bob's point about some different ways to interact based on, let's say, the profile, I guess, of a writer, and there's potentially having different tools on how they want to interact with different kind of information. So that's the usual environment. You can move around in AR, VR, otherwise. What is quite specific, though, is in the URL, you can now set change modifications. So that was probably not obvious, but the panels there were white before. The wireframe were white. And I did not change a piece of code. I changed here part of the URL. Right? So if I'm putting another color and I put red, then the panels get red. The how it's done is basically you have a selector. So part of the elements, so here they're called panel with 2 N because not first language, color, which is the property, and then the value red. But it can be other things. So that's a feature. I think it's practical. What's interesting, though, is if I put this back in the chat and I share it with you all, if you open it on the headset or on your desktop, whatever, then you'll have that same experience but modified. And it can do a lot more. This, like changing the color to red, is not super exciting, but you can hide the background to go back about the discussions before about wanting a plain one or not. And the point is that you don't need to ask me or anybody else. And you can also save them as a file. So here I change a lot more, even though I have only one parameter. because I loaded a modification file, which I'll try to show you the content of. Yes. So that's the content of the file, which actually is just that part of the URL as I showed you for changing the colors. And you have a radically different view between this and that. So this is the same content, but here you load the modification parameters. And that can be a lot more. Of course, you can have dozens of lines of modifications. But again, there are for you. And you is any one of you here in order to match your writing style, your still, the whatever basically you want. So initially, it's just visual. There can be a lot more. You can rotate objects around, move them around. You apply basically modification to the content. Here, why do I show it to you is because, again, once you save that URL, so you bookmark it on the headset, on desktop, wherever you want, you'll share it with others like I just did now. And it means it's going to have not just a different way to see things, but if you hide or show commands, then it's a different way to interact with the different information you put on display. So I'm showing you this now because I hope at least it ties back to the discussion we had earlier about different perspective, different workflow that might need different perspective. So that's one way to do it. And again, without touching the code. One can, of course, still change the code, have different version and all this, but this is done this way. And it also means you can, I don't want to say do whatever you want, but you're not going to break anything. If you restart from the beginning of the URL, you're back to the blank state. So that doesn't remove this discussion about scaffolding, onboarding, having a new user and making a decision for a new one. But it also means we can send a different URL to a quote-unquote expert user or somebody who would just start, would probably want to have maybe less things and then bit by bit increase the amount of things to do. Thank you.
Yeah, it's brilliant, Fabien. Thank you. Bob.
Just a question for Fabien. I couldn't tell whether you were talking as an author view or a reader view.
So theoretically, here I just made an example where you change the color of the wireframes, for example. But if you're, let's say, from a writer view, I imagine, but that's just me speculating, you would probably want a big panel in front of you and a couple of panels on the side with maybe the tools or whatnot. If you're on a reader view, you probably want no noise, just the front panel maybe. And that can be the same way configured by the URL. So you could have one reader view or writer view with, again, like customization based on the URL. So that I haven't digged into it specifically. So for example, if we were to test it right now and you tell me I need this, I need that, maybe some of it wouldn't work. But in theory, at least, I believe it's flexible enough to support this kind of different views.
Thank you.
So guys, I'm going to try to sell you on why I think maybe we should have the physical table available to us. There's a few reasons, and when you look around in the space, generally your information will be here. We need to decide on where we want to have controls, right? Dene, are you still there?
Oh yeah.
Is it the table? That's not cool. All right, we don't need to talk. We don't need to talk about the table.
Well, you're arguing for the table.
Well,
I thought we worked out a plan for table issues.
Well, the thing is, to accommodate different preferences, we need some mechanism. And for instance, I mean, one of the things it seems reasonable is that if you have your hands on a table, you have more control over where your hands are and you don't have to lift them. So you can then access the means through which you can change your views. But is the preference then that we take our chair back and we use our hands only in space?
Why can't it be a choice? I thought you and I decided it would be a choice. Table, no table.
Yeah, that's where I'm going. But
Okay, well, I think that's different than you're arguing for a table. Yes, we need a table in one context, but not everybody should be forced to have a table if they don't want one. I don't put my hands on a table normally.
right.
I don't know why. It's not a
But
habit.
you do when you type. You don't want to type in the
Yeah,
air.
but I don't want to be, I don't need, if I'm in VR, I'm not typing on an object that needs to be held on a table. I'm in space and there's nothing that's holding anything, right? It's a different environment. I don't need necessarily to type even.
But we do need some initial time together situation where we can go into different things. So, okay, if we don't have a table, then the assumption is you wheel yourself back from the desk because you're going to be seated
You
at a
can't
desk
have,
when you
what I'm
start.
saying is you should have a table for anybody that wants one, but we are not arguing for a table. We're just saying we're going to make a table available for those folks that need one, and we don't need it. You don't have to make an argument for it. I think we agree that some folks will need it, right?
I just mean that in order to go between having a table or not, there needs to be a user interface mechanism. And if you have your controls connected to a table, or if you don't, that's quite a big difference, right? So let me just explain my reasoning for this. My reasoning was I was going through all these different views, and the view that we had last year of text in space. There are many issues if things are far apart and all of that stuff. So then, for some reason, for me, it felt natural to have controls at hand level, basically table level, interaction controls, and information at a more natural space level. So if we're going to have controls, because we're going to need, we're not just going to drag one item and put it here and put it there. We're going to need all kinds of controls for selecting lots of things and doing things. So where are we going to put the controls? Right, we have the hand menu idea, obviously it's slightly different this year. That's one of it. But if we are going to give users the option of having a table or not, then if the controls are connected to the table for the table use, they are then going to have to be liberated for the non-table use. And that is what I'm trying to see how we can design for both. And also the use case is an academic at their desk. So they do primarily start with a desk, and then in some cases they push back. But are we thinking then, Dene, about a floating kind of a carousel that always follows you, that's always visible?
I think, yeah, we talked about it would be at the bottom initially, but then you can actually move it around. It's kind of like the VR space in Apple already, right? I can move anything I want, anywhere I want. And so it would be at the bottom, it just populates there, and then you could put it off to the side, right? So it's not obfuscating your view, or put it behind you or whatever. It floats, everything floats because it's VR space. It's outer space.
Yeah, I think I'm leaning a little bit towards what Horn said. Humans exist in space as an actual space. So that's why, in some cases at least, it's nice to have some indication of a room, and also to have the controls kind of off there, and where are they? Anyway, Mark.
Yeah. I just sort of loop in something that got sort of discussed on Slack, so I may not be here, but I think one of the things we bottomed out that essentially the table is also just a substrate for display spaces. So the thing you're putting the table there because you want to put something on it. So there are two parts to your table. There's the skeuomorphic element, which is the table that gives you a sense of context, if that's what you want. Part of its object is that it knows that maybe it's surface, maybe there's a secret pan underneath the table, but essentially, most obviously, you'd have a display area or possibly several display areas on one physical table. If you don't need the table, you can turn that off. The spaces are still there, and I think that's an easier way to connect the two.
But the table is still there.
Well, no, because you don't see
No,
it.
the
So it's not
physical table will not move, and that's a key thing.
right. So you're missing the right. You're asking how you get from one to the other. The answer is, well, you show the table if you want it. If you don't need it, you're just left with the display spaces because that's the thing you're going to interact with.
No,
It's
but
pretty
then
quite simple.
people may bump into it.
What
If
happens?
you're
What
sitting
happens
down,
if they bump into it?
if you're sitting down, you're not going to bump into the table, surely.
Well, okay. Let me just as a straw poll, who here would not like to have a table indicated in VR at all?
I don't know. I would have to have a look at it. I would have to. You imagine that we're all looking at a similar table that is in your mind. But we are not all looking at the same table, I imagine.
No, it would be the same table. I mean, physical table would be different. And one thing that Fabien has in his current build is the opportunity for a virtual yellow table to be aligned with your physical table. Fabien?
We have a choice.
Yeah. I just wanted to say that I really liked what Dene said, that if everything floats, it's not really an issue because the user can, solve any placement of where the controls should be. Maybe it might lead to some weird situations where you could even put the controls under the table, but maybe for a first version that's not really a big issue. Maybe it's even a feature. Maybe there are even situations where you would like the controls to be under the table. I have no idea, but I think it's a really nice pragmatic first start. I think if everything floats, there is no problem. Or at least, I mean, you would still have the benefit of this non-Euclidean or maybe a bit weird possibilities of having things maybe go into each other's. I think sometimes it can even be a feature. So I kind of support this. If everything floats, there's no problem thing. Grabbable as well. Then there.
I think what Frode, just to say, the choice is you have a desk or you don't have a desk. So it's not we have to make an argument for it. It's there, right? And I think Bob's comment is about the notion of platonic desk. Remember the notion of chairness, right? So what is a chair? And if you talk to, and Plato's argument was if you talk to 10 people, you're going to get 10 different types of chairs. Aristotle's argument was that there's 4 features of a chair that we can all agree on, right? It's utility, etc., right? And so there is a way of explaining what a table does, its functionality. So it doesn't matter to me if it's a yellow table or a red table. If I want it, I'll pull it up. If I don't want it, it goes away, right? So we don't need to be arguing over this. I think we all agree that a table could be useful for people who need a table. And those are the early users of this technology. And then when they don't want it anymore, they can go to my world where everything floats.
I don't see having a master's degree in ergonomics. One of the things, as I'm sure you know, is that hands are heavy. Minority Report won't happen. You're not going to be standing like this working all day. It's just not going to happen, right? So I don't understand.
Our hands are in our laps, Frode. I'm sitting here right now talking to you for 2 hours today. My hands are right here in my lap. They're not on my desk.
Okay. The thing is, on the Vision Pro, we only have our hands and our eyes. We don't have controllers yet, even though apparently the PlayStation VR controls will be available. Our bodies are based around physicality of the world. So I don't understand the benefit of throwing away the physical table you have in front of you, which is designed, it doesn't interfere.
Many people will genuinely not have a table.
I want to argue that in the early days.
Hang on, Dene, just a quick second. Brandel, you mean academics at their work will not have a table?
Or they won't have a table that's appropriate to use in front of them. Sorry for jumping in. Ergonomically, people don't hold their arms out like this. They hold them one or one clock ahead in terms of their elbow, and you can lift your forearms basically any height from more or
But
less arbitrary
that's in Vision
durations.
Pro. If you want to grab something that's up here, and we're doing it in WebXR, you have to grab it up there. Anyway, okay. So
storytelling. People before they were writing, people orally told stories, and they did not have a table when they told a story. They would orators.
Right. No table. I get it. No table.
No, you're not hearing us.
No, but
You have a table if you want one, and you don't have one if you don't need one. We're not saying either or. It's Mende. It's both and.
Yeah,
We're not arguing against you.
The problem is we have to design basic interactions for how to change things. We're in month 2. Last year, we also took quite a while to get the basic interactions. So the basic interaction now has been decided to be floating. So the table can be there as a benefit for those who want, but the table will not be connected with having any controls or information tied to it. Right? So that means that the table is a visual artifact in VR. It is not a functional artifact. Because if it's a functional artifact, we need to decide how the functions that are connected to the table will be available when there is no table.
Karl has his hand up. Karl. Hello, darling. How are you today?
This is a multifaceted question with a multifaceted set of solutions. So, if you're using inside-out tracked VR, which I think most of us, that is the plan, having a physical object, whether it's a chair, a table, a desk, a broom, it really doesn't matter. Having a physical anchor point that is always in the same spot, regardless of, like, relative to your play space, is helpful for orienting yourself in a new environment spatially. And if it's a flat surface, if it happens to be a flat surface, whether it's inclined or level, really doesn't matter. That means if you get some hard haptics inside your headset where you otherwise wouldn't. I can take a virtual object, hold it in my hand, put my hand flat on my desk, and it's always going to be at the same Y level relative to my play space. Or if I stick it to the wall, it's going to be at the same X level regardless of my play space. So these are useful, but if you start using them, you run into the problem of, if I want to toggle them, it's very easy for me to toggle the virtual representation of that object, my 3D model of the desk, the 3D plane that is the wall. It's very easy for me to turn that stuff on and off with code inside the application. But now I have to somehow communicate to my user that that area is no longer valid within their play space, or like other people said, they're going to run into it. So you need to be able to dynamically pull in or extend what the valid play space is for that inside-out headset based on whether or not you're going to use that physical object. Or you need to just leave the virtual representation of it on so that they know that it's there. So there's pros and cons to both, and toggling them can be done and be done easily, but you have to think about what implications that's going to have of toggling it on or off, using it or not. And I do agree, I think, with what Frode said, is that we're trying to look for what is the default new user easiest to use, make sense of, function, what is the most obvious visual and interaction paradigm that we can just hand a headset to somebody with minimal instructions and see if they just put it on and just get it. And that is a UX problem in VR that's not really solved right now. It's a very tough question, because the more photorealistic your environment is, the more people are going to try to interact with and do stuff like they would normally in the real world. And so if your interaction that you let them do or don't do does not mirror their expectations, they start to get lost and they start to get confused. If you have a stylized environment, kind of like what we have now, we're finding that users either don't have any expectations and you need to very explicitly tell them what they can and can't do, or demonstrate to them how to do it, or they come with very strange, skeuomorphic warped expectations from video games, television, all sorts of other forms of fiction. And basically, you have the same problem. You have to very explicitly tell them, this is how you do things. This is where you need to go. So affordances in XR are a really sticky subject right now because there's a lot of research that shows some people just pick it up, put on the headset, and they just get it. And a lot of other people just don't. So trying to figure out what makes the most sense for a new user is going to be really hard for any of us who have prior experience with the headset because we have existing expectations and experience to fall back on when we get lost or we don't know what to do. So this is going to be a user study style question of implement different paradigms, different affordances, different views, and hand them to users with little or no explanation and just record their feedback and responses and see just by raw data points which one is favored more to be the default.
Thank you, Karl. Bob, is your hand up?
Yes. Just one point. Usually in all the discussions I've had in design of this sort of thing, people use mock-ups. They use it in groups, mock-ups. They realize that they're not, and in this case, maybe since we're in 2D world most of the time, we use 2D mock-ups. I don't see many of those here in this discussion.
If you go to our journal on our website, you will see some of them, and also what Fabien is doing is real XR mockups.
But I'm saying we use the mockups as I did with sharing my screen. It would be really helpful if Karl had a mockup of what he was saying about this. It would be very useful for me. I mean, again, I'm not one who's here regularly, but I'm really grateful to be here today. I would like a mock-up of what you mean by controls. It doesn't, in the end, it won't be like that, but we need something to start with. We need something to all say, okay, well, it's sort of something like this, and we can see it.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Bob. And after Fabien, I will show a mock-up because we do need to get to the point where we have proper arguments around not just loose things. So thank you, Bob. Fabien.
Yeah, so 3 things, but super quick. Number 1, Leon and I will have to leave soon-ish, a little warning. Number 2, regarding Bob's point, absolutely, 101%. That's I've been begging people pretty much at every meeting, like sketch things, and really like on the corner of a table is going to look, sorry for the bad word, but like shit. I don't care. I need to see things. You use Microsoft Paint for all I care. You use whatever. You use 2D, SVG. You put them anywhere and everywhere. I need that, and it helps me to think, especially when we talk about moving things in space, in place, that really helps. So yes, 101%. For the last thing, so that's just me personally. It doesn't involve anybody else. I want to help people, especially academic, to think further and better, and to try crazy things. I'm not Apple. I'm not preparing a product for millions of people. So it doesn't mean that UX is for like one person again. But it also means I'm not, again, personally interested in finding the easiest UX path for everybody on Earth. I cannot do that. And I'm not actually interested in it. So it doesn't mean I want people to have a proper onboarding. Otherwise, I can't even get feedback if does it make sense or not. But I'm also, again, that's just me personally, not interested in the smoothest, easiest path for 8 billion people with XR or convincing even people of using XR. I don't care.
Good points. In honoring what you said, Bob, so this is an article that I wrote a while ago. I made this image. These are 4 separate columns. This is not supposed to show one thing. And it highlights an interesting design issue because on the 3 here on the left, that is Fabien's current default background environment. If we put text with frames, it becomes heavy. If we put text with a background around it like a rectangle, it weirdly occludes. If we leave text just by itself in this environment, it becomes hard to read. Now, the column on the right indicates just text and space, very similar to what we have last year. That seems to be a good solution, but sometimes we do need more dimensional things. So the design issue here now is how to go between these modes. And this is the reason I'm excited about the notion of a desk, because maybe if you have these transparent sides, it can help the user understand that there is more. So if you do something like a swipe gesture, and I'll show you the swipe gesture. So you see, you take your palm up and then you move, and that's it, right? One more time. Something like that, because it is harder for the system to get it wrong because it is constrained to a very specific plane. So then there's the notion of designing the table. It's not obvious. It could be like fancy, completely skeuomorphic. It could be more organic skeuomorphic, or it doesn't have to be skeuomorphic at all. It could be as minimalist as we want. But if we go up here, we want people obviously to feel they're in the information. So the table should not always be visible. I agree with that, right? But I think it's a good anchoring mechanism for some things. This, I think, is a nice, these are all AI, by the way, so they're all a bit weird, but just to help us think. It indicates that as the table is turned, you get into different kinds of controls. And then, of course, you have entire views when you are in VR and so on. So all I really would like us to agree on is some sort of initial view where you have some sort of an interface mechanism that makes sense to first have just knowledge object on a plain background, but now maybe you want to be in a diagram construction or etc. I think Bob has a comment on that.
It's just that it would be helpful if that's what you were showing, that saying that we're having a minimal table, here's what it looks like, without showing 50 of them. Don't need 50, just need one, and where the control might be, what would the control look like? And then we have a discussion if do we want to discuss that at this point? Is that what we want to know and decide? And are we going to decide it or not? I mean, that's what I'm not. That's all I'm saying. And I apologize for being coming from the outside. And clearly, I had not seen your tables before.
You hit the nail on the head, 100%. Also, I think we are at the point where I should have presented some options for controls on there, and there should have been opposing designs as well. I completely agree with you. I really want to get to a point where we all feel comfortable with the basic initial, and initial isn't to apply to all users, as Fabien said, absolutely not. The user is someone who's relatively comfortable with XR looking a few years in the future, but it shouldn't be completely weird either, right? And it should allow them to see a view of the world, of their knowledge world, do a thing to see other things. Now, the reason this is so important is because there is a hierarchy, like Dene was talking about earlier. There's a hierarchy of interactions. There will be an interaction to change literally the environment. Right? There will be an interaction to toggle between environments quickly. There will be, or views rather, there will be interactions within the environment. So where do we want to place this hierarchy of control? For instance, if you want to move a piece of text, you should probably be allowed to reach out, touch it, move it. That's not a problem. But what if you want to select all text that has a certain attribute? Then you need an interface mechanism for that. That may be a control bar, it may be voice, it may be on the hand, it may be on the table even, right? So that's what I'm talking about, we have to decide. So the basic thing we have to decide is, how do we go between a plain view with knowledge to a mapping room or a diagram construction room? Maybe we want a Brandel timeline. How do we get to that?
Do we have a list of those? A hierarchy of interactions?
No, we don't, because you have helped me vocalize that issue. It has been in the back of my mind. I haven't written it down. So also, Bob, thank you for your clarifying questions. So I think that as I hand the mic back to Peter and then Mark, etc., if we say that the interactions we're talking about now are not interacting within your specific thing, but how to go between things, is that's a reasonable core layer to look at, right, guys?
Yep.
Peter.
Okay, I just want to call everyone's attention to those two graphics I dropped of the cigarette tray concept. I know doing physical things is out of scope, but I think it does sort of map in a hyperreality sense to the haptics that you'd want to have associated with the desk that Frode is depicting for us. And the advantage of a sling it over your shoulders tray concept is that, as say you're on a swivel chair in the middle of an empty room, I rotate around 30 degrees to the right. Well, that tray is going to also rotate around 30 degrees to the right, and that could map in VR to my rotating around the desk in VR, and I'd still have the haptics of being able to reach down directly in front of me and feel the desk. And now, of course, the desk has moved and tracked me. That means if I have a Bluetooth keyboard on the desk, it's going to be in the exact same position, but I can be working with hands and not lose the ability, as I'm rotating, to have the keyboard in the same location. So
Peter,
it just...
Please write it down. It is completely, utterly out of scope, but it's really cool. So please write it down as a journal article or just as something for the book, because we need to keep that.
Okay, and that can be a chapter in the next book edition. Okay, that sounds good.
Thank you.
Oh, and one other thing. Has anyone taken a look at cursorless? It's a layer on top of the Talon speech recognition systems, all free software, and it's optimized.
We're not going to go into speech right now. We just don't have time. We have 21 minutes left. But please put a link in the sidebar if you want to for that.
Sure, I'll grab the link to it.
Okay, Mark, please.
Fabien, do you want to go first? Because I suspect that.
Two hands, Fabien. That's brilliant.
You go first, Fabien.
So no, it's kind of to express a bit what I put in the chat, namely. So I'm grateful for the passionate discussions and how we fight for different viewpoints and attempt at it. I also want to insist. I've said it in the past, but like what I built first is just an attempt. It's definitely not what, like, you have a bunch more ideas than what I can implement, and it's also it's not a reference. It's not even an example. It's just an attempt at trying potentially some of those things. So it's nothing more, nothing less. It's definitely not prescriptive. It's like little blocks to build more out of them, basically. So it's not because it's on one way, table or not, or whatever it is, that it's rejecting the rest, basically.
Mr. Anderson.
Yeah, I mean, it really sort of follows on from that, because I saw Fabien's comment. I mean, and just shows we have preconceptions. I'd sort of imagined the what Fabien's built is essentially to argue a matrix. It's the construct. Welcome to the construct. You're sat there in a big white space in your armchair, sort of thing. And the views that we're talking about are the things that, in a sense, you're going to do with that, because at this stage, one of the things that I think is, at least we could say, is solved or partly solved, is all the really useful work that Fabien's given into the thought into moving files essentially inside our our virtual reality kit, but it's not necessarily yet in the place where or the presentational form that we want it to be. And so I'm sensing a slight disconnect in the conversation here, because I think we're smushing a couple of things together. We have a sense of wanting to change between different views that are essentially mutually exclusive. So in other words, if you're going to be in one totally immersive view and you want to go to another, then you need to signal a change to do it. Whether in a sense, let me finish, please, Fred. When my train of thought. Right. So when you're essentially in the loading construct, you have information available to you, because you may want to say pick only some of that information to then take into another space. You don't necessarily need to all the time go through that, because you may not need to. You may, for instance, have saved, as we've sort of discussed, having saved parameters, said, no, this is like my loading space, and I will go straight to that. But I sense there's a degree of confusion about this sort of, in a sense, control desk, because one of the things you're going to go there, you either know what you already need, or you're going to take the things you want, and then you're going to enter into something. I think that's the thing we haven't quite taken hold of.
What you're saying now is really important, Mark. And it's a headache that's been bothering me, because sometimes, even in my initial thing, doing a wedge changes everything. But then, as you said, sometimes you don't want to change everything, right? So I see that as a second layer, but we still need to figure out a basic, you're in the room, and let's say everything is set up from your last session, even for the first user, there's something there. Now,
well, wait a minute. Sure. Well, here's the confusion. I think at the moment where we are is, for better or worse, that we're loading into what for better or worse, I'll term at this point the construct. We're loading into the space that Fabien has created, which is none of the other spaces that we've been talking about.
Right.
And that's not because it's a better or worse sort of thing, but the one thing it does do is it puts you in a position where you have the information that you wanted to bring in, because that's one of the bridges that he's built for us.
Right. Good point, Mark. So we have decided that the use case for authoring should be to author for our book, volume 6, right? And we have decided that a key thing is doing an annotated bibliography type of thing. So that means that we need to have a new set of knowledge, and we need to access what exists. So I could imagine for a demo use case, person puts on headset, and what is floating in front of them is the previous or all the previous volumes of the book in some amazingly cool interactive form. They need to be able to interact with that, to read it, annotate it, extract, all of that good stuff. That is really important. Then they need to be able to do a thing whereby they can make a new thing from that. Very vague language on purpose, because we have to decide what that means, right? It may mean writing a traditional PDF type thing, or it may mean a Bob Horn style diagram or mural based on recombination of those things. There are many things it can mean. Now, at the kind of end of the day, they need to be able to export, using the word loosely, into an archival PDF, which may be a bit of text and a lot of JSON. I don't know. That's a bit of a requirement. However, our job really is to find out that when the second person who sees their work puts on the headset, some amazing experience. Right?
How do you define amazing?
That was very useful description. However, I've lost it completely. That is, can you write that up not in long paragraphs, but just in a list like you gave it? Because and if that's a frame, that's the kind of frame that we could make a mock-up of.
Thank you, Bob. And Dene put actually first was Peter, sorry, who put in a screenshot from the Matrix where they're standing in the white room where the chairs and the guns are about to arrive. And Dene commented on that. So, yes, I'll write it down, Bob. But the thing is, reading something to author. The thing you author, someone else puts on the headset, should be amazing. How do I define amazing? It's not for me to define. But theater-wise, the feeling should be I've literally never looked at it this way before. That is the emotion that I'm looking for. Yours may differ, and that's fine. But it shouldn't be, oh, okay, this is entirely what I expected from VR. Can I get out of here, please, right? That is what I want us to experiment with over the year, to try to find out how to do that. And I think an efficient way to do that is with the view specs. Yes, Dene?
Mark's before me. I'm after Mark.
Okay, so I'll get very quickly. Sorry, I wasn't. My question wasn't flippant just now. What I was trying to get at is that, you see, rather than me being amazed, which is fine, but it's just emotion. What we should want is that people should see something they sort of recognize they can do something with, and feel it's something they will want to engage with. If we get that right, then they may be amazed by it. But if we just try and design a sort of theatre show, then that could just be a Potemkin village,
Mark,
and we've not achieved very much.
Mark, we're not trying to design just a theatre show, but what you just said there are very important components on that, and those are things we should write and talk about, no question. But I'm just saying that we're going for exactly what you said. Anyway, we're running out of time. Dene.
I just want to start wrapping us up so we can know what we're doing, because I think we've been all over the place. I'm not certain if we agreed on anything at all after all of this. So let's step back for a second and talk about what we've done, right? So I'm going to put my hand down. Give me just 1 second. Okay. So do we all agree that we're going to call the thing we enter into the environment, and we might have two different environments, right? A and B, and they're meant to be some sort of way to train folks how to use the environment and move to something that they might find useful later, right? So are we all in agreement with that or not? And
I'm
not
not
my feelings.
I'm not sure if A and B make sense, because we're talking about changing the views within that, which can be a myriad of different views.
Okay, we have two different.
Hang on. In terms of the background, the spatiality of it can also be probably many things, plane, 3D, and so on. So maybe instead of talking A and B, we're talking about general environment and knowledge space.
This is where mock-ups are necessary. This is where mock-ups are necessary, because you're talking about the word space or the word view. They have ask the Oxford dictionary how many meanings there are. There are 50 of space. I looked it up yesterday.
Yeah.
So unless you have mock-ups, you're not going to communicate.
Right. Okay.
So let me just finish up my thoughts here. So when I'm just saying this, because right now I'm working with my students to design a project, right? And the first step is to develop a mood board. Like, what is the mood we're trying to achieve in the environment, right? Not what is the environment, but what is it we're trying to achieve? What do we want people to feel and understand what we're trying to convey, right? All right, once we design the mood board, then we say, okay, now, what is it that we're trying to, how are we going to get that across, and what does that environment look like? So my question is not about A or B, it's about we have a choice between something that's more skeuomorphic and something that's more non-skeuomorphic. We give those two environments an opportunity, and we'll sketch those out, right? We'll make a model of those. So just to finish, once we do that, then we get into that environment and we have potentially 4 to 5 different views that we can do in that environment. And that could very well be a carousel that starts off at the bottom of at a space on the environment that's floating, and the person can tap on it and bring up these different tools they want, and then move the carousel out of the way. Is that something we can agree on at least?
When you say A and B for the environment, do you mean what is in the background?
The environment is, I land. What am I seeing? From my environment, I want the minimalist environment that Andrew developed for last year. I want nothing back there. I don't want flowers. I don't want trees. I just want a blank space that I can populate with text.
Right.
that would be freaky for people who are not familiar with that kind of environment. So we give them a more common experience. They're in a VR environment where there's a desk and there's maybe a computer screen to make them feel comfortable, right? We give them that skeuomorphic experience of an office base.
So how do you,
Right.
I thought you were talking about author space or reader space.
No.
Yeah, that's,
And
yeah.
now we're talking about some sort of first user who's never put on a thing before.
That's exactly right. We're going to have people like that. And we're trying to envision what do they need to feel comfortable, Bob?
Dene, how do you propose the toggle should go from A to B? What should the interaction be?
Well, you're talking about swipe, right? You said swipe. I don't mind if it's swipe. I don't care what that activity is. In the world that we invented, the Figursky project, where we went from traditional to contemporary, we had a toggle button, tapped, and you go back and forth. So I'm in the contemporary view, tap. I'm back into the story space in Apple System 9.2 on a 1998, a Molar Mac. Toggle back and forth. And you can do that right in the middle of the experience. So maybe that rather than environment, the first level is, what is the experience you want to get into? Is it an experience that's minimalist? Is it an experience that is skeuomorphic? And they have a choice. And we can toggle back and forth, whether it's swiping or tapping toggle.
Right. I'm not sure about skeuomorphic because, as a term here, because the only difference, I think, is whether the table is indicated in XR or not. A rectangle. I'm not talking about the whole environment. So the default environment is definitely what you're talking about, Dene.
One thing I'm imagining is that, let's imagine you're forced to, let's say everybody has to get into this office space, but you can tap out things. Oh, I don't need a desk today. I don't need this today. Oh, now I have nothing in here except what I'm working with. That's one way to get around having two different environments. Everybody lands in the same space and they can tap out of things they don't want. I don't want a computer in my VR space. I'm trying to get away from computer screens.
Okay, the computer idea was basically a joke, which has been, as a way in. I don't think it's that useful, but okay, yeah, Fabien.
I'm like literally I don't get it because I think at least I tried, so I guess I didn't show it properly, but the per URL customization is supposed to fix this kind of discussion in the sense that you want background, you don't want background, fine. You want table, you don't want table, fine. You want color, you don't want color, fine. You want something that's specific for reading or writing, also fine. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's the case now already, but the fact that it can be customized per URL, I hope shows that you can have this. And again, you can bookmark this, which makes it permanent for you.
Which is good and useful, but we still need. Okay, let me ask you. So, user puts on the headset. They're in an environment, which is what Dene explained. There is text knowledge in space. However, in this initial one, there's also an indication of their own physical desk, so they can maybe use that. Now, the question then becomes. Well, okay, maybe I see having a physical item modeled in VR or not being really, really big difference. I don't think it's a toggle like a background having a tree or a plain background. In terms of the interaction, having something to put your hands on or not, I think is really, really fundamental, right? And considering, mentally, yes, of course, we want everything to be fluid. And to me, it seems like a step backwards to just not having anywhere for your hands. But okay, it seems there isn't a real appetite. So then we're talking about you're in the space, you move your chair back, and then we now need some interaction to go between different layouts or saved spaces, right? We also need interactions for how to interact in the space. So maybe we just decide that the hand menu is for going between spaces and a floating bar is in the space or something. I don't know. I just don't think hiding or revealing a table is a simple matter. I think it really changes the experience.
Fabien? Fabien?
No, it is a simple thing, and it's the case now.
Technically, yes, but not from the user experience.
I mean,
Well, it depends on depends if you're the writer. I mean, or the author. For example, I'm going to just show you what I'm working on. I'm working, among other things, on, as I mentioned previously, how do we improve human thinking? And part of the way is I have to know what kind of documents am I talking about. Upper left-hand corner here. And when I share my screen, can you all see it?
Yes, yes.
Then below that, there are all the kinds, at least most of the kinds of science documents that need to be addressed. And then I've talked about idea chunks, and I am itemizing there. I think we've probably got 80% of the idea chunks identified, defined, and able to put into these different discourse domains. So this is how I'm working now, and I want to say I'm grateful that I can make a large panel like this and then look at it. I can look at it together. We can look at it together. We can zoom in if you want to on any of these things. And I've got it now. Since I last talked to you, I've made about 20 of these panels from my work in order to achieve my work, which is not the work that you're doing. The work that I'm doing is trying to improve on thinking and reasoning and so forth, which comes from some past projects that I worked on. So it would be helpful to stay for me in conversations like this, to be in the, say we're in the author mode for the next half hour or something, and really not go back, being back and forth on, at least that's what has confused me in our discussions.
It is basically all author mode. This year is all about authoring, but some of the authoring will include reading to get your sources. I didn't see Dene left. I know she has a meeting coming up after. But okay, so I'm not going to fight for a table anymore, but I really do not feel that a table is just a toggle on and off. I think there's a fundamental difference if you have a physical workspace where you can even virtually have controls onto it and move things. So you have that. Because I don't think once that table is made invisible, that is beneficial. That you have to, if you have to roll your chair back, then your workspace is further away. You can't reach your knowledge objects. Fabien, sure.
Yeah, one thing that's been discussed before, we didn't touch on it today, but we also discussed about like per item widgets. So if we detect that a thing is, I don't know, the furniture, we can apply some widgets like changing the height of that object. So it's not something that's been implemented, but it's been discussed, and I think it would address this kind of per room a physical object adjustment.
Yes,
so that might be a way.
But Fabien, Dene wants no table.
That's not my understanding of her point, but
for herself, she wants no table. She's happy for other people to move in and out of a table space.
Okay.
I however, believe that to design an interface that is physical table-based and one that isn't are really, really different. That is my limited XR experience. So therefore, we give up the table. And when we put on our headset, we lose the utility of the physical room, and we have to have interactions for changing the environment, for interacting with it, all without having anything to touch. We're just going to have to do that.
It wasn't zero sum. I think this,
Mark,
I just urge us not to keep attaching people's names to things because it becomes unintentionally sort of ad hominem. The point that Dean is making is a choice. Some people may want this, some people may not.
Yeah, but Mark, it's like to me, it's like the difference between taking a bus and a bicycle.
Yes, but you can have a table if you want, but maybe not force other people to have something they don't want.
No,
it's really the heart of this.
Yes, no, you're right. I cannot force a table upon those who do not want it, but I am responsible for the design of this project to Sloan. It is literally my job, right? And I cannot design stuff that you don't want. So therefore, we cannot design for a table. Because I'm sorry to repeat myself, Mark, but you can't have both. You can't both have a table and not a table. We're not talking to make a joke. You can't have Schrodinger's table. Because if you just visually make it go away, right, it's still there. So if you want to have an interaction that doesn't involve the table, you need to pull the chair back, be away from the table. So when you move your hands about, you don't accidentally hit the table. That is a thing. So if you attach controls, right, I really think that virtually putting controls, visual information and stuff, because in a computer you have a rectangle, obviously, right? On the Mac we have controls at the top because of Fitts law. It's easier to hit.
Okay, I think, Frode, if I may, I think
in XR you have nowhere, you have no frame. So
I think the confusion is that you've just articulated a number of basically starting assumptions about the thing, and when I say assumptions, I don't mean that disparate. That's not a negative, but they're unstated assumptions. So one of the things I think, and this rather goes back to akin to what Bob was saying about prototypes, is to actually surface those assumptions as to where you're sitting and the physical things in front of you, because we're talking about sitting down work, and then we're talking about sort of pushing back and not sitting down the work, and these are all confusing. So we need to surface those assumptions because they tie quite closely into the relevance of some of the things we're trying to design.
Mark, those assumptions are no longer assumptions. They are stated on the website. These are agreements. This is a primarily seated experience. You can stand up if you want to, because this is for an academic at their desk in their office. So that is an assumption that is now solid. That is a criteria now, right? So we have that, and considering the different degrees of wanting a desk or not, I don't really see anyone else wanting a desk other than Karl having some pros and cons. Fair enough. We will abandon the desk idea. That means that we need to have a discussion on the different kinds of interactions. How do you go in and out of spaces? How do you interact within the space, etc.? We need to get to that point. Fabien?
Yes. Well, I was also trying to say earlier that just from a technical standpoint, not a design decision or anything deeper than that, the mechanism right now is when the URL loads, you open the page, the thing are set up hopefully the way you expect. But it can be summarized in one file optionally, but that summarized file of modification is also at runtime or dynamic. Namely, you can have a set of different customization and switch from one set of customization
Fabien,
or another.
I get that, and it's really you have created a really fantastic system with a lot of optional ways of modifying it and having options. That is really, really good. But still, when we get down to designing the interface, it has to be consistent. It has to have a certain framing to it, right? And if we are not going to use the one physical attribute that every single user will have, if we're going to throw that out of the window, notice my words, I really like the idea of using the table, then we have to start literally in floaty space, right? Are we going to have in floaty space the means through being in just knowledge object in space, and then we're going into a timeline? How are we even going to get the interactions to work? We have gesture issues because of gesture clash. One of the things we really learned last year, if we move a gesture along a plane that is known, haven't tested it, so it may be more consistent, right? If we have the appearance of literal buttons on the table, we have targets to hit, right? There are so many affordances that become viable when we use the thing that the person is guaranteed to have. So I really think there's a baby bathwater window situation going in here. But fine, now that we're designing for just in space, as we found out this morning, or I found out, you told me, Fabien, if somebody touches the menu here, we can't have something map onto the arm because we don't have inverse kinematics. We don't have the rest of the arm, right? So there are limits to how we can map functions onto the body. I would like to do more of that. That would be very useful. But I think we are a little bit in the space of there are so many different categories of things to interact with, and we haven't even gotten anywhere near that. So we have to, as a community, agree on, put the headset on, you have some stuff happening, now you want another set of things. What do? Yeah, was that a wave, Brandel, or a leaving? Okay. Sounds promising. Well, that was an optimist. Right, okay. Peter.
Yeah, that's why I keep coming back to that cigarette tray concept.
No, we're not going to do a physical
I know
thing.
we can't do it, Frode, but wait now. Couldn't we maybe, in the virtual world, simulate having a cigarette tray holding a keyboard in front of you?
We can't, because we don't have the chest mapped. The chest isn't mapped. Your body isn't mapped. We basically have our hands. So this isn't mapped. This doesn't exist.
Well, I mean, actually, we can have something that's relative to the head, like 30 centimeters
below the center
lower,
of your,
for example.
it's like below the center of your head, out in front of, the position would be relatively where a cigarette tray would be, but it could be based upon the center point in your skull. We have the center point of our skull, right?
Technically, I think that's feasible and no problem. And I was also telling Leon earlier, I would take a scarf, make a knot. I put a table tray, plastic tray, and put a keyboard and actually try it. And you don't even need a Bluetooth keyboard. USB-C plug to the headset, and you try. And I don't want to sound like you're dismissive about this. And this is just prototyping. Like, you have the idea. It sounds actually interesting. Just do the thing. Don't wait for anybody to try. And it's going to look clunky at first with the cable and all, but at least you can evaluate, is it worth going further or not?
Because I don't want to completely throw away a physical desktop. At least, some sort of a wearable approach lets you have the advantage of physical desktop without necessarily being welded to a physical full-blown desktop.
Yeah, but
do it.
Okay, I'll find my longest scarf.
I'm just looking at yeah, okay. I think we had some serious problems last year with the laser interface controls. We had very few controls. Now we're looking to, at least I think, touch an item like we can in Fabien's work already to move it around. We still need to decide on how to provide interactions for those items, to where to put them. And I still don't know what the initial kind of view should be. But okay. We'll have to figure it out. Anyway, we're 10 minutes over time. Any final thoughts from anyone?
Let's keep it positive. I think the hardy debate is nice. We need to note some of the things we try, some of the things even the things we don't try, we write down as a potential future path exploration. But I think it's good to have a positive discussions regardless of the conclusion we do take.
Yes, but it would be good if after one of these meetings we actually had something to try. They are very circular meetings. So in terms of today, we haven't decided on a new approach, have we? That's something we should try to work up towards. Bob and Mark looks very confused.
Sorry, but that's all right. I'm just trying to try and improve my own authoring working environment daily, and and I'm happy to that you'll let me be in this part in this discussion from time to time when I as many of you know, ordinarily I have another commission, another commitment to this time on a weekly basis, so I can't attend for most of the time.
Yeah, no, that's fine. We're glad to have you here, Bob.
It's good to see you all.
Good. Mark, before you go, did you also scrunched up a little bit? Did you feel that we had reached a conclusion that was testable? because that's really important to note down.
Yeah, so as I put in the chat, one of the things I'll do is I'll go on filling out that sort of rough list of sort of axes of miscomprehension that I think would be useful to give us a sort of some sort of triage thing. So when we're talking about, say, what's the initial thing you see, that we're just able to, even if we are talking about it from different perspectives, we know what the other person's internal perspective is. Because I think that's been one of the problems. And it's nobody's fault. Absolutely. It's just the nature of stuff. We're all talking about something that's in here. And even if you try and sketch it out, it's still not, because of the nature of the thing we're dealing with. I mean, one of the excitements about the XR is we can do things that are just sort of kind of hard to imagine at the moment because they break traditional physics and all sorts of other stuff. And that's part of the excitement. I mean, it's more than just making a bigger office, for instance. You know, I think we understand that. So that's one thing I will undertake to do. And I did see your last email, Bob, and I will reply to it. Not with the long essay I've written. I'm going to prune it down a bit now, but I have some ideas for you. Yeah, it's there to go. I think what I think we haven't quite bottomed out is a mutual understanding of the, in a sense, the first thing you see. Fabien rightly has made it very flexible for us. So in a sense, he's not giving us an easy answer. We have to decide what it is. And it's quite clear that people have fundamentally different imaginings. Not to be contrary, but it's just their internal picture. It's quite clear from listening to the conversation is quite different. So that we can get into doing stuff like UI, we need to design the UI for the right thing. And the problem, I think, what's derailing the conversation at the moment is where essentially haven't quite got that connection. So one of the things I will try to do to get that done, and I will try to get it done this week, find some spare time, is that I'll do that. One other quick thing, just so people know, I've had to Rob's asked me, he started playing around with Aeon Timeline, looking at and seeing if there's anything useful in timelining for him for his authoring stuff. So I'm going to do a session with him tomorrow, looking at that and teach and talking about spatial hypertext and things. I know he's not doing academic writing, but he's authoring, and I would bet something that some of the things he has to do as an author in his context are still relevant to the things we want to do here. So anyway, we'll see what happens.
I have lots of timelines, Mark, including 1,000,000-year timeline.
Sure, yeah. And I mean, one of the things that I think it's interesting to get to is this problem that timelines are lumpy. They're normally, you witness your case with Narex. It's also reasonably in the present case, and then suddenly it's a long way away. In our mind's eye, we deal with that. No problem at all. Try and put that on a thing designed in software, and the ones and zeros get really confused because it does not compute. We don't have sort of elastic bits of time, and that's something that sort of eluded, I think, a lot of the visual design so far. One way to do it.
Steve Harold at Boeing solved at least part of that problem. I can send you an example.
Oh, surely. No, always interested. I mean, I hesitate to add, I'm not speaking as an expert. I don't want to give that impression. I mean, I spent a lot of time looking at timelines, but I'm certainly not expert. What I mainly know is things that don't work in relation to timelines.
So I see Karl's question here, and for those of you who are still here, where's the list of known problems for spitballing solutions to like gesture issues? That's a very, very good question. And I wouldn't say we have that kind of a list, but what I can say is that we are learning more the realities or constraints of XR, as you know very well, Karl. For instance, gestures like Minority Report stuff, most of them don't work because they're either getting owned by the operating system or there's gesture crash because you're talking to someone and suddenly thinks you're doing something else, right? So that is definitely part of what we're talking about. But the key thing is we need to have you sit down, and we don't assume we're going to do a novice user who hates XR. We don't assume that at all, right? We assume that this is someone, to put it plainly, someone from Sloan who's paid for this, we're going to put it on, and they are not going to be familiar with this. So it can't be crazy, but it also shouldn't be too pedestrian, right? Go on, and they probably will have an environment of knowledge objects in text, in space, like a knowledge map type of thing, and there can be many types of that, of course, Mark. And then they need to know how to interact with it, obviously. So nothing I'm saying here is something you don't know. I'm just answering your question in sequence, right? So we need to, hang on one.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I was just answering.
No,
Sorry.
no, that's the answer is yes, Mark, and that's a very good question. We can absolutely edit those as we increase our understanding. There's no requirement for it has to be frozen in time, other than year on year when it goes in the book. Right. So I really think we should have something novel and useful for the interactions here. We all agree on that, right? So once we're in this space, how do we summon something else, right? I don't want just a bar floating in space. I think that is a bit obvious in a bad sense. It'll get in your way, right? Because one thing that is clear, especially with the Vision Pro, because it leaves things in space, if you have too much in space, it gets in your way. So one of the main reasons that I really like the idea of using the desk is that you can't walk into it. So if you have commands and controls on the desk, it's a safe space because it's not really going to interfere with your reading space, right? So I could imagine, like Peter, you have been very nicely talking about physicality. Imagine on your physical desk, you pull up, right? You have these little, almost like card indexes or something, right? And of course, it can expand into something, but you have a place to get things from. Right?
Put a desk in. Put a desk in as a mock-up and do it and go on and move on to the next question.
We have no, Bob.
Why can't you do that?
First of all, we have a desk in Fabien's world. It's yellow, and you can kind of get it at the right thing. There's a wobbly thing he has to fix. But the constraint is that Dene absolutely does not want a desk in her view at all, right?
Well, let her take it out. I mean,
but that's the thing.
You mentioned toggling, and then let's move on to the next question.
Bob, this is really important, Bob. If you toggle visually to remove the desk, it's still physically in the room. So if you have the controls in the same place and you press a button that was on the desk, you're going to hit something physically that you do not expect to be there, right? So I'm not saying this is intractable, but we have to go through it. So for instance, if you toggle off the table, maybe these controls lift into space or something. I don't know.
You can't solve that by having a long discussion about desks. I don't think. The people who are working on the actual coding, maybe it's Karl, I don't know who, or Fabien, they're the ones who are going to make that, and they're going to make two different versions of it, and we've got it. I don't see, for me, having a long discussion of a tabletop is not what is important to me about authoring.
No, but Bob, that is why you need to get the headset on and try this. I sent one to you. You have one. This is available, and it is real, because if we just talk about it like you're saying, it's quite ephemeral. But when you put the headset on and you go into Fabien's environment and you do the overlay, it is very, very different. It is having a hands-free experience and having a physical artifact. I'm sorry, it is not a toggle. It is a completely different thing. And I really don't think that we can reasonably, unless we think of something really cool, have a way between them. Right?
All right, I accept that. I certainly accept that. Yeah. And I'm I place my own constraints upon my own time and so forth. Yes. So I'm sorry, it interferes, but I've simply I realize I'm talking as somebody slightly with one foot outside and one foot inside here.
If I may,
come with very good questions, and it's hugely appreciated.
Frode, if I may, and something that might help is I didn't, from the articles you wrote, the one thing I didn't get from it was something you just said. So there is this idea, and I know, and which sort of Karl took us through the arguments on that. If you have basically something that is an echo of something that's part of your physical space, that's actually, whether it's a desk or anything, I think that's the connect. That's probably where we're getting, I think, getting derailed. So there is the issue is, do you have something in your space, or even if just in your starting construct, that is essentially in some way anchoring you into your external physical space? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. I'm not making a judgment you do. But the issue about what it is gets us down a rabbit hole. So there are two separate things. There is the sense of, in a sense, you being in sync with where your physical environment is, which can happen, which you might want for a variety of reasons, versus how that is actually shown. Because we had a separate discussion on Slack about sort of table and display, and as I read it, what I thought you were basically describing was a substrate to display things on. That's how it came across in the article. But you seem to be raising something different. So it might be useful to tease those two things apart in a way that posits, because I get the point. I get the point is made about that. Personally, the things I want to do in XR are flexible. I don't really want any of the real world there. I go in there. For me, the entire draw and the interest is in knowledge exploration and taking things that have no form and giving them form, and then probably bringing them out. And then I probably wouldn't even work in them in XR. Then I'd export them out and do something in tools that were designed for further thinking, for further use. But that's not every. But again, I stress that's not everyone's need. I'm just revealing my colours here and explaining why I'm to get lost on some things. And that's certainly not everything. And it's really interesting. The thought-provoking comments I've had from Bob is because I'm trying to get my head around the fact that sometimes you're in an exploration space, which is probably the thing I've just described, and another time you're essentially in a diagramming space. And I don't use that as a pejorative at all. So in one, you really do want ambiguity because that's increasing serendipity, that's increasing your chance to understand. In the other, you absolutely want as much reduction of ambiguity because you're doing something to pass information sort of misunderstood to somebody else. They all live in the same space, and often you're doing the two things, normally hopefully the one before the other. But teasing those two things apart because they actually have very differing
Mark,
impact
yes. Mark, those are different views, rooms or spaces, yes, and that is very, very important.
Well, no, they're not. There's something. They're not
necessarily
different views.
They're the same.
Different modes. They're different modes of work.
Yes, okay.
That's an important thing to understand.
Okay, use the word mode. It's okay, Mark. Mode or view spec or whatever. That's fine. I agree with that. Okay, those are the different things. We still need to get to the. We go in so many directions in these discussions, right? One of the ways to get around the issue of the basic interaction of the desk could be something like Bob. Okay, right.
I just don't get it.
Okay, you don't. Fine, but okay,
Yeah.
you don't get it. That's okay. You don't have to get it. Okay, but the thing is,
Right.
one of the things Fabien could do is implement on the desk a button that lifts the control away, fades the desk so it's invisible, and moves the controls closer to the user who's now far away from the desk. If the person moves too close to the desk, it comes back into view so they don't crash into it. Things like that are possible. However, that does mean that he's going to have to design an interaction that is seated with a desk, an interaction that is back, not a desk. They are different. We have 1 year, small budget, one programmer, one set of designers. We have to stick to one, right? To have this toggle between different things, because I think about this 24 hours a day, which doesn't mean I know more than other people, not you guys, clearly, but it does mean that I know more questions and more issues than most people, right? The actual kinds of interactions comes down to polish, even though it's not going to be a commercial product. That means that if we were to do a standing thing, the way we organize, how do you see the controls? How do you hide the controls? What controls do you see now? Do they apply to this or do they apply to that? There are so many issues that we can't do two, right? And I've had to give up on the desk, right? Which I think is absolutely ridiculous. I think the desk can provide a real firm place for someone to have some information. Now we're going to have everything floaty, spacey, right?
Well, just
so, Peter, we have to.
Peter has his hand up. Peter.
one thing. There is a chance that we're underestimating our users a little bit. When I use my desk, I have a two-tier desk. So I have my desk where I have books and things on it. Plus, I have a slide-out tray that has my keyboard. So I can reach underneath, slide out the tray to be using my keyboard or push it back and be working with books on the desktop surface. So I'm dealing with two surfaces. Now, if I'm in my headset, I know where those two levels are, and I'm not hitting them. I know where they are. They're not changing relative to me because I'm sitting physically at my desk. I know they're not moving behind me in the real world, so I know exactly where they are, and I'm not hitting them. So it's not really a problem. So there's a chance that people can deal with it, and we're assuming that it's going to be an issue, and they're going to be smashing their hands into a desktop when in reality they wouldn't be.
That's not the big issue. The big issue is not the accidental collision. These systems all have collision detection. If you get too close, then it'll show up somehow, right? I was just trying to make the point that, okay, would anybody here like to type in the air like this? Okay. Karl,
that's why I like a physical desk with my real Bluetooth keyboard on, or my imaginary cigarette tray solution, if we could do something like that.
Okay, yes. The answer is yes, Peter. Mark, would you like to type in space?
It depends what I'm doing. It's the wrong question to ask. It is the wrong question to ask because you're asking it out with any construct. Would I want to type for 2 hours like this? No. Would I want to do something quickly so I could work in an exploration space so I could just change something? No, absolutely. I don't want to be encumbered by physical devices. That's why the question is too broad at the wrong point. I think Karl's point is well made in the sidebar here about so to tease apart and discuss these things separately. I made the same point. It's absolutely apparent to me from today that there isn't a consistent view of everyone sitting here as to when they essentially load into Fabien's construct, for want of a better word, as to whether that is actually a working space, a view where you do things, or just in a sense, for want of a better word, a sort of lobby from which you then load a view.
No, it's a working space. That's
not necessarily, that's your view, but I'm not saying that's not what everyone understands it to be, because we haven't defined it as such. So there's a missing step.
I just defined it as such.
Well,
but
it's after it's 10:30 in the morning also, and you've just defined it.
No, but hang on. Why would the person who is working in our authoring environment not be in a working space? Why would they be in a lobby?
I think you're misunderstanding what I mean by working space. Right. So, for instance, good case in point. So I'll take, if I may, Bob, because here in the room as an example, because he was asking, well, look, I want to take my stuff, and I then want to work on it effectively in a like an open. I just want an open space where I'll put the stuff that I want to work with in it. Obviously, if he's in Fabien's starting space, there's all sorts of other extraneous stuff that he won't want because it's not pertinent to the job at hand. So one of the tasks that he faces is to get the files that he knows he wants into the environment, which Fabien's construct allows us to do, then take some or all of the files there and then instantiate them in the view that he wants. Now, that view will not be Fabien's view because it's going to be all-encompassing and it won't have all these other bits and pieces. Now, whether we then go and build links from that view back out to sort of Fabien's, like an inbox and outbox or something, is for something down the line. But essentially, the things are all the thing we produced last year. You're not going to overlay that over Fabien. That wouldn't work at all because that you go into.
But hang on, Mark. We're not building an environment for you to load something to go somewhere else. Okay, of course, things need to be connected at some point. But what we're building here is for an academic who is writing something.
Yeah, I do understand that task.
Right. But so why do you think that we're going to Fabien's place and then go somewhere else?
Somewhere else is the wrong way of describing it. That's a deliberate pejorative. The point is, you're going to be doing different tasks. We've talked about having timelines. We've talked about having last year's environment. But then you've got all the gubbins of Fabien's spacer, which you don't want. It's not pertinent to the task. So that needs to go away. So, because one of the things it's allowing you to do.
That's the whole point of the gesture of going through different environments. That's the whole point.
Okay, so you've just agreed with me. You're saying you go into a different view.
No,
It's
but
just
still
to understand.
space. It's still
Environments,
space.
views,
Look,
50, 100 meetings,
Okay,
100
Bob,
meetings.
Yeah,
it's
so
not
this
a
is why the
problem.
terminology needs
Environment is
refining.
okay. Okay, Mark, you go in there and you want to do a slightly different task with the information that's there than what is presented in front of you. You
Yeah.
need the means to do that. We all agree very much, right?
Yeah, but don't get lost in how you do it. You've just described that you're doing one thing, you want to do
I'm
another.
not getting
Now need
lost
to
in it.
change.
That is the key question.
No, it's not. No, we're back on. Forget the gestures for a moment. Just you said you're going to be doing. You're here. You're in Fabian space. You now want to do something else. For instance, you want to be in like last year's reading space.
Okay,
That
well, that's
emphatically
relevant because
doesn't
we're not going to
support.
support that. You can be in different Fabian spaces. That is all we're building. We're not going to suddenly go somewhere else. It's beyond scope. Let's say you want to go into Bob Horn's diagramming room that is Fabien is also producing. That's a viable thing for us to do.
Right, I understand that, but I'm just clear on the fact that if I'm going into Bob's diagramming space, it will not essentially be. It may be built by Fabien, but it won't be his starting construct because you won't want all that other stuff about the inputs and outputs and the effect of their little mini filing system and stuff, because that's extraneous, not pertinent to the job at hand. Yeah, it's angels and pinheads, but essentially, because the thing to understand is also there are two sorts of experience. There's where you're looking at essentially something in a window. It's part of the environment you're in, or you're immersed in it. And if you're immersed in it, then for want of better, whatever we call it, you are in a different space. There's no getting around it.
Okay.
Otherwise, it just doesn't make sense.
So
And that's the transition I'm talking about. So
that's what today's meeting has been about. Absolutely. This is
it hasn't really.
This is author, as you know very well.
Yeah.
At the bottom, I'm clicking 3 different tabs. You have 3 different views of the same information. Right? That is what we're talking about. I'm trying to find the interaction that you will do that. Right? You
have to name those 3. Please name those 3 and put them in boldface at the top or someplace. Upper left-hand corner is what we in the Western world generally use. Okay, and so name those 3 things so that we can then talk about those 3 things with the same name.
Yeah, they are named. On the screen, it's a bit hard to see. It's writing, mapping, and outline. They are named and they are on there. And Mark knows what it is, which is why I'm using in a conversation with him on this point.
But I couldn't see them.
Okay.
It was a formatting problem then.
Oh, no, it's not. It's a screen problem of screen sharing because I have over 40,000 users for this. And so far, no one has complained about seeing what room they're in. So it's the way that you're seeing it on the screen now. It's not an inherent problem. But Mark, the issue, I believe we're talking about the same thing. How do you toggle logically the same between those kinds of tabs in Author when you're in the workroom in XR, right?
If you want to call it toggling, fine. But I think the thing to understand is the state transition that's important.
Move between, change, alter.
Anyway, with deep apologies, I'd stay if I had time, but I've got a hard stop now. I've got to.
Mark, let me just ask you: is that you are talking about that, right?
Yes and no. The no part is that I suppose it's to do with the initial thing that you land on. So if you open Author, you open into the long form writing space.
Not necessarily.
I didn't know you could open it another way, but
that's an implementation issue. But okay, so
well, no. As currently implemented, that is how it works. What I'm trying to get at is the difference between, as it were, the landing space, the initial thing that you see when you arrive, and the other things you'll do.
Yes, we need to define the initial thing you see when you arrive, which will be the thing you were in last when you were there. Okay, that's really important. Now, hang on, Mark. It
doesn't have to be that though. This is
the whole point. Oh my goodness! Look,
Fabien has made it so you don't have to do that.
The initial point of view is not separate from one of your workrooms, okay? It is not like, here is a finder on a desktop computer, what are you going to open? No, right? You enter into it, we're talking about toggling between the analogous author.
I think you're being driven by your knowledge of author rather than the space we're building, if I may. And I don't mean that unkindly, but I think that's probably what's guiding your perception here.
Either way,
you don't necessarily want.
You're going to be moving between maybe having a library with filing cabinets. Maybe you're going to be doing posters. You're toggling between different things to do with your information, right?
Yeah, but you're also toggling between different subsets of information. The way you're describing it is you have all the information all the time, and that is not necessarily helpful, because then you get the too much problem. And as you well know with a map very quickly destabilizes with too much information. So it's a nuance, but the point being that I would contend that we, before we just hard set anything, that we understand that Fabien's construct at the moment does one very important thing that I don't think anyone's sort of arguing against, is that you can move information from effectively the 2D world into the 3D VR world. Whether that's all you need, everything you need, is not yet clear. Depending on the task you'll do. And I go back to Bob's quite nice simple exposition, which is that if I want to look at these 4 or 5 diagrams, those are the 4 or 5 I want to look at, not
Mark,
100 I have at hand.
Mark, I get your point, okay? And I know we all have to go, but whether or not it's the same information or slightly different is important for constructing this thing. But in terms of the user has to be presented with their information. They have to be able to change the view of the information. We have to decide on the interaction mechanism that they do that. Make it something users, primarily us, like, and make sure then the data will support it. This is a user experience. It's not a data experience. It's not for the system, it's for the human.
That's a rather childish point, actually. I think you devalue the work that's being done if you characterize
Mark,
those terms.
please, you're interrupting me. Right. You use such loaded language against interaction so often, right? And all I'm saying, we're building an XR environment that is for a human. Yeah. Right? So it has to work for the human. So we make.
Well, that's the point I was making.
So we make assumptions. Let's say, behind me now I can virtually pull out a book or whatever it might be, but then I want to be doing diagramming a la Bob Horn. So something I do, gesture, button, jump on my head, whatever it is, changes what I see. Now I'm in the Bob Horn space. Those interactions need to come first, and then we need to figure out, okay, those are great interactions. How can the data support it? Right? So I don't want to go into another data and how user data and what's stored and all of that again, right? Now we have to redesign because table is out, right? Last year, Mark, do you remember how long it took us to get past trying to define library? That was quite a long time, right? We can't do that anymore. And also we didn't really design an interface. This year we have to.
Well, that was the problem. In fairness, we still got stuck in the interface before we knew what we were designing for, and that's why it went round and round, because we kept redesigning it.
That's history. I'm sorry.
I'll follow up with you, Bob.
I won't do that kind of history.
Yeah, I'll send you an email, Bob, on the stuff you asked me about.
All right, Mark. Yeah. All right, Mark. Good to see you.
Yeah. Okay.
Good to see you.
Take care.
Stay with it. Bye.
Yeah. Well, right. Sorry, I'm being called away for dinner. The point I was trying to make about you have if you're going to say other people have a thing, you have a tell that the moment anything is not about effectively the graphic design element. Your interest
it's not graphic design, it's interaction design, Mark, please.
Well, but the way it's done, sorry, I'm going to have to go, but we can follow up. Anyway, I'll see you on Wednesday.